to you.
Thank you.
You've covered up such lovely points that I can just pick up from there and take off. So thank you so much for that. All the esteemed faculty members, professors, and wonderful, wonderful students who have joined in today. Also, some of my students from Maniben Nanavati Women's College.
Oh, right. Happy to
Very,
hear that.
very good day to all of you. And at the outset, I must congratulate the Department of Women's Studies for having the courage to take up such a wonderful topic. A lot of people don't like to talk about this. And then to involve a mental health professional, a psychologist on board, and say, okay, come on, you talk to us and tell us what you have to share. So, well, yes, definitely, it has been. It's a very generous and kind offer. I have to thank the organizers, especially Dr. Mangayar Karsi. So, while I start my presentation, I'll just try to connect to this slide. I would like to tell you that when I was considering presenting this paper and as I was working on it, one of the things that surprised me was that there is so little information. There is such little information about the challenges that NRIs face. So, if you can just tell me, can you see the slide? Is the slide visible? The burden.
Yes, yes, yes.
So, in case the slide goes away, please do let me know at some point. So there's a lot of existing literature on the challenges of NRI marriages, and as Serge just spoke, there are a lot of legal information available. There's a lot of information available in terms of what we should do as a country, as a group of Indians who are affected. Advice is also plentiful, from local to global, from grandmother to government. There is a lot of advice available. Keep digital copies of yours in your husband's passport. Keep legal documents in your place. Stay in touch with your friends. Keep money aside. Always be available on the internet. Have a mobile connection. A lot of this is very good advice, and I wish some of that advice even came for resident Indian marriages. But I was deeply unhappy to note that there wasn't much about mental health care. There's not much about mental health care on my searching. Maybe I'm not tech savvy enough to search appropriately. I don't know, but really, mental health in NRI marriages. Largely, the literature talks about how marriages are good for physical and mental health, but not NRI marriages. Now, speaking as a practicing psychologist, I also do provide marital counseling, and I can safely say that I don't see too many healthy marriages. Obviously, I'm a psychologist, so unlikely that I will be seeing healthy marriages. I see the unhealthy marriages because only the sick need a doctor, not the healthy. So I decided through my talk, I would share with you my experiences of some of my clients who are NRIs and who are struggling in their marriage. And also to keep the discussion gender neutral, I will share the experiences of NRI men who got married to Indian women and NRI women who got married to Indian men. I know generally when we say NRI marriage, the idea is that it's an Indian NRI male who's married to an Indian woman. But there are two sides to every story. So the structure of my talk is very simple. First, we'll talk about what is mental health. We'll talk about the connection between marriage and mental health globally as well as in India. We'll talk about the specific challenges in NRI marriages and the role that culture plays in the mental breakdown of failed NRI marriages. Also, some recommendations based on my limited experience. So to begin with, what is mental health? Because this is largely a mixed audience, I thought I'd just cover up some basics. Firstly, the absence of mental illness is not enough to describe mental health. This is an integral and essential component of health. The World Health Constitution states that health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. Mental and social well-being we tend to forget all the time. It's not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. An important implication of this definition is that mental health is more than just the absence of mental disorders or disabilities. I just want you to just take a minute to think about yourself today. If I ask you, do you think you have a mental illness? Most of you are going to say no, I'm sure. We don't like to think of ourselves. If I ask you, do you have any physical health problems? You'll say, yeah, I have a headache, I have a backache, I have a shoulder pain. But if I ask you, do you have a mental health problem? You'll be like, no, definitely not. I'm perfectly okay. Mental health is a state of well-being in which an individual recognizes and realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and can make a contribution to the community. Considering how much of this is happening even in our own marriages, I mean, you're an NRI or whether you're an RI, look at the amount of comfort level you have in your marriage. Sometimes it seems to me that the biggest stressors in our lives are as a result of marriage. I'm sure there are a lot of married people in the audience, and you could probably decide whether you agree with me or no. Mental health is fundamental to our collective and individual ability as humans to think, emote, and interact with each other, earn a living, and to enjoy life. So, on this basis, if you try to understand it, promotion, protection, restoration. Promotion, protection, and restoration of mental health can be regarded as a vital concern of individuals, communities, and societies throughout the world. Any phenomena that jeopardizes this ability needs to be looked at very closely so that essential and appropriate checks and balances can be put in place. Marriage, I think, is definitely one such phenomenon. Let me just also change the slide now. So, is marriage a cause of stress? This is, I think, the right time to come up with the poll, Dr. Mangai. The first question of the poll. What does research tell us about mental health and marriages? It tells us a lot of things, but I want to take a poll from here, from the audience. How many of you watching this honestly?
The participants, please post in chat box.
Yes, there's a poll question that has been put out. You just have to respond to that. How many of you feel that stress in your life, especially the married persons over here, do you feel the stress in your life is primarily because you're married? It could be in-laws, children, finances, keeping up with the Joneses, competitions. Sometimes competition with the family is what is extremely intense. It's more intense than the competition that comes, like, oh, my cousins are doing this, am I doing this? So, how the poll works, I think our host, Dr. Mangai, will tell us. You can post an answer right now. Do you think, especially the married people here, do you think that the stress in your life is primarily because of marriage, or there are other reasons?
The participants, you can post in chat box either yes or no or whatever ma'am is telling.
Yeah. If you think marriage causes stress, put yes. If you think marriage does not cause stress, put no. Please keep typing it in the chat box. I'll follow
this is the no too.
Yeah, so far we've got no too. And I'll give it a few minutes. I'll continue with my presentation while the answers are coming in. Yes, ma'am. I
can. Being married in this stress, to my part, yes. I am calling yes.
Thank you, Mangai ma'am, for being honest today.
Participants, please post yes. To an extent, yes. Marriage plays major role in stress.
According to Dr. Mangai, marriage plays a major role in stress. Oh, I can.
Yeah, people are sending back. Yes. We receive some responses. Yes, you can see chat box.
Yes, I'm seeing.
Yeah. Please check that.
I'm looking at the stress box and it's a chat box. It's looking into like a stress box because does it mean that get married? I'm just wondering, is it still necessary to get married? I like Suganya says yes.
I imagine it might be induced stress with the in-laws.
Okay, all right. So various aspects, when I'm talking about marriage, I'm talking about the various aspects that get connected to it. Could be because of the in-laws, could be because of the children, could be because financial obligations are higher, could be because social pressures are higher. Also for women especially, there's a lot of physical challenges that they undergo. There's a lot of physical change that happens, motherhood, birthing a child, weaning, nursing a child. There's a lot of upheaval in a woman's body. So there are so many reasons. Yes, I agree with you, Dr. Kalpana. There are so many reasons. Anyway, to take things further. So let me talk to you about some research. There is this project called as the Common Cold Project. I don't know if you've heard of it. Now, this is research conducted over 25 years, and it is now a collection of 5 major studies in the United Kingdom. And they were basically trying to prove something very, very simple. As the stress in your life increases, Is it that your tendency to catch a cold increases? Very simple. Stress increases, cold increases. Across 25 years of research, the resounding answer is yes. This is basically to prove to those people who say that, stress is something else and my body is something else. No. When something goes wrong with your mind, your body does respond. A lot of other disorders which are associated with it, psychiatric disorders, personality traits and disorders, dependence, passiveness, aggression, histrionicity, paranoia, obsession, especially when you have things like aggression. These may not sound, I hope you're not getting too put off by the words. In our culture, a lot of things are accepted as it's normal personality trait. Oh, he's a very short-tempered person. Oh, or she's very kitpit, or she's very noisy, or she's constantly complain, or always nagging. A lot of things which might essentially have been a psychological problem gets normalized into believing that this is basically just a personality issue. It's not a big deal. It's nothing to feel worried about. Um, I was looking at the answers, and I wish there were more males who answered. So far, there's just one gentleman who has answered, and he says no, that marriage is not the cause of stress. So when there are studies in male neurotics that have been conducted, it shows that because the wife is unable to escape from the husband's constant neurotic behavior. Neurotic is like, constantly stressed, constantly irritated, complaining, finding fault, criticizing, saying this is not right, that is not right. A lot of this contributes to the wife's marital tension. Sometimes even the separate outlook of both people, over a period of time, we tend to get married pretty early, between like before 25 seems to be the ideal age for most people to get married. Personality keeps developing, and by the time you're 40, 45, you turn into two different people. And along the way, a lot of them get independent and move away from each other. And that's kind of the end of the marriage, sorry, so to speak. Now, specific situations in marriage like anorgasmia, impotence, these are very, very specific issues nobody likes to talk about. The core or a very strong basis for most of the marriages is a strong physical relationship. That does not exist in most of the marriages. And people don't like to talk about it in India. Problems with children, death, or financial losses, all of this. Now, studies show that the greater distress is amongst married women as compared to married men. Also, they show that single women are happier than single men. Marriage offers protection to men when it comes to the onset of severe psychotic disturbances, which means if it's likely based on the biology that a gentleman is going to end up getting schizophrenia or a major disorder, that starting point of the disorder gets pushed by at least a year if the person is in a healthy marriage. Married men have the lowest rates of depression. Not that they don't have, but they have the lowest rates of depression. It's found to reduce the risk of mental disorders in both men and women based on studies in the Western world. But yet there is a strong association between marital problems and depression. Indian married women are less likely to get mental health care because of the stigma associated with mental illness. If a woman is divorced due to the presence of a mental illness, in most Indian families, the problem is that the woman is divorced, not that she has a mental illness. That's how we are approaching the situation. A lot of these complications happen because in arranged marriages, especially, relatives, matchmakers, parents, they don't completely give full information, no full disclosure to the other side. Even with the individual getting married, many people keep quiet because they don't want to spoil their chances. The pressure to get married is more powerful than the pressure to stay healthy. And this is a cultural phenomenon, largely because our Eastern cultures are more patriarchal and emphasizing the importance of marriage. The concept of Sundar Sushil Kanya, basically beautiful, homely virgin girl, is still very, very strong. Just look at the matrimonial ads. These words turn up very, very regularly. The honor system, where the child's choice of when I'm saying child, I mean the daughter or the son, the choice of partner can reinforce or weaken the honor of the family. So the person I get married to is going to have an implication on the honor of my family. This can place an immense psychological burden on me. All right. There was a study conducted by ICMR and DST to figure out the severe mental distress and whom is it most common in. They found housewives, whether urban or rural, are the most stressed because of marriage. And all the people who have survived, they said that people who are married, widowed, or separated, means if someone has been married at any point in their life, this group is more stressed than this group who has never been married. Now, I'm using the word stress very, very loosely. Stress could mean anxiety, depression, all kinds of psychotic breakdowns, neurotic breakdowns. I'm not using all the terms. I'm just using stress because it's a lot easier for people to understand and accept. The other problem that happens because of marriage is divorce. And sometimes the divorce is not happening. Divorce happens because of marriage. No? And sometimes the problem is substance abuse, alcohol, drugs. Divorce rate is very high among heavy drinkers, and wives of such men are usually anxious, depressed, and they're also socially isolated, unfortunately. Society does not get together to protect these women. Almost 80% of domestic violence is seen due to alcoholism. There are some Indian studies and Western studies which corroborate this. Addiction to any substance is the predominant cause of domestic violence when you're talking about Indian population specifically. And because of addiction, the one relationship that suffers the most is marriage. Now, compared with the general population, people who have died of suicide are more likely to have been divorced, unemployed. Social isolation is a common factor. Marriages where there are children, the risk of suicide reduces drastically, but because of the conflict in the home, the children suffer a lot. And then these children end up coming and sitting in front of a therapist's chair. And sometimes they don't come as children, because when you're young, you're powerless, you probably don't even know you need a therapist. They come back as adults, maybe 40, 50 years old. And when you're talking to them about their current problems in life, when you go back to the source, it starts from the conflicts that their parents had when they were a child. So when the caretakers are not able to provide the child with the necessary love and security, the child does not end up disliking the caretaker. The child ends up disliking himself or herself. And if I'm going through life without liking myself, I'm not going to be doing very good things with my life. Suicide research in India shows that one-fourth of the persons committing suicide are unmarried, which means the others, that's the remaining 3/4, are married. A lot of suicides happen in the first year of marriage. Family problems, whenever we say family problems, it's largely for married women: marital disharmony, dowry, ill treatment by in-laws. Let's look at some more statistics, just simple ones. This is a study across 1993, 2000, 2007. Common mental disorders, okay, between people living alone and not living alone. Living alone are the white skyscrapers. Not living alone are the white skyscrapers. Living alone are the black ones. Consistently across time, people who live alone seem to be showing a lot more of mental illness. But this does not, this is with the hope that people will get social support and therefore not end up with disorders. But now just look at the next graph that I've put on the same slide. This is an American statistic again. This is based in 2000. And just look at the last one, what is the view or the approach to people who have mental disorders. The number of Americans, or the percentage of Americans who are willing or unwilling to have some kind of relationship with them. Now, whether they are willing to accept them as neighbors moving in next door, whether they are willing to spend an evening with them, whether they are willing to make friends with them, whether they're willing to work closely with them, or whether they want to marry into their family. Highest 68% people refuse to have someone with a mental illness marrying into their family. But when we are looking at a life partner, and we are looking at the Jadagam, and we are looking at the bank account, are we looking to check for mental stability? Let's also understand that when we're talking about NRI marriages and the mental health burden, we're not saying the marriage causes the mental illness. It's also possible that the mental illness was present at the time of getting married. So can we recognize mental health in others? Women sometimes seem to be able to recognize, but men don't. But the point is, about 20% are able to recognize all the time, which means for the vast majority, it is a gamble. We don't even know when somebody is mentally healthy or unhealthy. That's what I was saying. We tend to look at something as a personality trait. Oh, he's just short-tempered. Oh, okay, this person. Otherwise, he's a good man. A lot of wives say this. My husband is actually very nice. Sometimes he gets angry and he beats me black and blue, but otherwise he's a good guy. And you'd be surprised at the number of upper class marriages in which domestic violence is very, very high. Domestic violence is not just something that happens, in the lower classes. Just a general spread of something called anxiety disorders, which we would say is the baseline for starting a lot of other mental health issues. If you look at across the countries, you're looking at people like at the most developed countries showing the highest rates of mental illness, right? Now, we may look at India and feel very happy and say, okay, ours is not a dark green, ours is light green, means we don't have too many anxiety disorders. Let's also understand that our medical structure is not geared towards identifying mental illness. I think everybody knows this, that all the schools are supposed to have a professional counselor, but not all schools in India have a counselor. And in fact, the counselor is made to do the substitute teacher's job. That's the reason why India is still light green. If we would have probably been able to identify, record, and document the number of people with mental illness accurately, we'd also have been a solid dark green. So what is the burden as a result of mental illness? What is the burden? If you look across the disorders, we are measuring it in terms of how many life years have been affected as a result of the disability. Look at the first one, depression, the largest. This is 2013 statistics, but the highest is caused by depression. Depression is a word which everybody understands today, and they're using it and misusing it as a joke. Depression, anxiety disorders, the two most common forms of psychological illnesses which are prevalent in every section of the population. So why am I talking about this? How is this so connected to marriage? Because as I said earlier, a lot of the illnesses are seen in married people. Are there any good things about marriage? Does marriage also have benefits? So even with all this research, long-term effects, psychological effects of mental health because of marriage is not very clear. There's a lot of research which talks about forced marriage, and forced marriage has come into play because in the United States and in the United Kingdom, there are a lot of welfare agencies who have realized that the women who have come into their country as wives and spouses have been forced into the marriage. And it is only when, because of medical reasons, they land up in hospital that they're able to identify that these are people who are women who are either being brutally attacked by their partners or are engaging in self-harm, cutting their wrists or, burning themselves, burning their hands, cutting their thighs. These kind of things are happening, and that's how the doctors get involved, and that's why a lot more research is happening. Life is stressful by itself. Life after marriage might get even more stressful. Now, a lot of it depends on the individual's personal vulnerability and their ability to cope. Some of us can go through the most difficult moments in our lives, and with the help of social support, with all kinds of support, we are able to go through it without breaking down. A lot of people break down at the smallest problem, and we tend to make fun of it, saying, my God, this person is crying for every little thing. That's a vulnerability. That's a weakness. It's like understanding that some people have lowered immunity. Some people are going to get coronavirus and get better. Some people are going to get coronavirus and not get better. Some people are never going to get affected by the coronavirus. They will be asymptomatic. Why? Immunity. Just like you have physical immunity, you have psychological immunity. So what are the benefits? There was a study conducted in 2005, and they said the benefits of marriage is amazing. It's like if you give up smoking, the health benefit that you will have to your body, that's the same kind of benefit that you have from marriages. This is when marriages are going right. People live longer, they have fewer strokes and heart attacks, lower chance of becoming depressed, less likely to have advanced cancer, or they're more likely to survive cancer. And if they are people who have had a major operation, then they're more likely to survive it after that operation. But what happens to NRI marriages? Specific challenges in mental health marriages, of mental health in NRI marriages. Everybody has to get married, no, as per our culture. People who are unmarried are looked at and not getting married, not looked at very favorably. People think marriage is very important, maybe for mental health, maybe for physical, maybe for loneliness, maybe for it's like a long-term investment. It's like your fixed deposit. When you're old and alone and there's nobody to take care of you, your partner at least will be there. Also, the reason we want to go abroad is because we believe life abroad is better. So many people in the audience right now may be thinking, oh, if I get a chance to live and work abroad, I'd be happier. Also, the social positioning, that, family status increases if my partner is an NRI. Also, the NRI partner finds, if one child gets married abroad, then you're expecting that the second person will also get married, and third also, the full family can go abroad. A lot of misinformation about the people. I think Sir spoke a lot of good things about how legal issues are just bypassed also, because people lie about the status, their financial status, whether they already are married over there or no, about their own mental health status, impotency issues. All these things are hidden. And sometimes we trust our family, we trust our friends, we trust our relatives. Sometimes you have what we call marriage brokers. They're all supposed to be well-intentioned people. We trust them. And we have to opt for marriages because, the family has to move ahead, customs have to happen, there has to be a socio-economic matching, culture has to match. And if you look at it, I've put union of two individuals at the end, because you think about it, when people are getting married, when we are trying to get two people married, we are not just thinking about those two, we are thinking about the two families, we are thinking about culture, we are thinking about what's going to happen in the future for the family. That's what we are looking at more than anything else. And that's unfortunately something that's not always helpful for the partners. So, the ultimate success story. These problems are, of course, a lot more visible in arranged marriages than in love marriages. And finding a partner is finding a mate. It's a normal human process. This is turned into this huge drama, cultural burden with stigma, prejudice, social inequality, patriarchy. All of these are the many layers of getting married. And the actual feelings and will of the individuals is very often, I won't say always, but very often pushed behind. Like, even if you choose, you're going to fall in love with someone, you don't just blindly fall in love. You're like, oh, what is the caste? What is the community? What is the financial background? That we ask first, and then we think, oh, do I get along with this person? In case of NRI marriages, all these layers get more complicated and amplified. The stress of proving to the world turns out to be the biggest stressor. Finding an international alliance is the ultimate success story of your life. So find an international job, find an international partner. Like, if any NRI rejects the son or the daughter, it is so shameful for the parents. And this has a lot to do with the very concept of marriage and how it is looked at in our country. There's a lot of talk about financial obligations, and I'm sure the speakers coming ahead will also be talking about it. I'm more interested in the psychological impact because of these financial obligations. As soon as a girl is born, we say, start saving gold. She's a girl, start saving gold. We have to say gold. We have to save for her dowry. We are not saving to invest in her life, her education, her health. We are trying to save for her dowry, for her marriage. And it seems to be all okay. Everybody seems to be okay with this concept. It's just so normal. You could be as educated as possible, and we can have all these discussions in the seminars and conferences. But at the end of the day, if there's a daughter in my house, I am going to invest more in her gold than probably in her ability to take care of herself. Sometimes even the sons are pulled in this because, it's your duty to get your daughter married. So the poor son, his brother puts his life on hold while his sister gets her life as per society's dictates. And it's very simple. I don't have to make it very complicated. It's a very, very simple way to say this. The burden of a daughter's marriage is a burden on the heart and the mind. And I'm calling it a burden. I'm not calling it a joy. Though people say, yeah, when parents of daughters, you talk to them after their daughter has just been married and they're like, I managed to do it. I finished a big task, something very important I finished, and I'm now relieved. It's not, oh, wow, I'm celebrating that my daughter has found a partner. It's like, I'm relieved, because till then I was carrying a burden. As long as there's a burden in your heart and your mind, you will recognize this. Your body is going to react. Your mind is going to react with physical or mental illness. That's why I was talking about the Common Cold Project. The reason I mentioned that is just to establish one very clear relationship. If you are stressed, you're going to have physical illness. in some way or the other. It could be as simple as catching a cold. And if you're carrying such a big burden, how much more mental health issues are you creating for the family of the daughter? Women have been placed within rigid social structures. So uh, you're trying to deny them their right or their natural ability to fly. First, we cage the daughter before marriage, and then we transfer the daughter into the golden cage of the NRI partner. And this has become very normal. I mean, just think about it for a minute. We have just normalized it. A lot of you must be thinking, so what's wrong? I'm just trying to get my daughter married so that she can live happily, and that's what I want. I'll share some of the cases, as I said, and then you'll understand why it may not be such a healthy option in the first place, and it could actually be something very traumatic. It comes to a point where even the daughters think that, oh, everybody is doing this job of adjusting, everybody's putting up with nonsense, so it's normal. You've heard of Stockholm syndrome. I feel that marriage is nothing but an extension of that. And it's not like I haven't seen happy marriages or I haven't seen happy couples, but we are focusing primarily on the challenges that come with marriage. Um, there is a reason why NRI marriage is such a big deal. The reason there is so much of legality, policy, the reason why we are having a conference and talking about it. The challenges that they face are not just legal. We are trying, when someone gets stuck in a wrong marriage, an NRI marriage, the government system, the legislative system gets into action. But nobody is getting the mental health team on board. All that you understand, oh, she's heartbroken because her marriage is broken, and after some time, whatever the social and cultural implications are looked at. The mental implications we're not looking at. It's not only a case of legality and finances, it's about pain, sadness, depression, anxiety, loneliness, post-traumatic stress disorder, the psychotic behavior sometimes that these women show, and even the men after the marriage breaks down. There are 3 cases I want to discuss because there's a lot of theory that was going on. 3 cases I'll tell you. The first one is of Mr. A, NRI man married to an RI, resident Indian woman. This gentleman has been living in the United States since he was 17, studied there, worked there, got his green card, did all kinds of things. He's officially now an NRI. But his parents were here, and parents said, listen, whatever you do, you will not marry a white girl, you will marry an Indian girl. And he was like, okay, fine. They found a girl, good family, financially very well-to-do family. So he said, okay, what the hell? It's something good. Before marriage, he made it very clear to his family, his spouse's family, to his spouse that I'm going to live here. I have always wanted to live here. I will live and die over here. If you're okay with that, then come to the United States. And they were all like, yeah, fine. Wife accompanies him after marriage. Within a year, she came back saying, I don't like the place. She says, I have no friends. I have nothing to do over there. Yes, it is a little lonely. She was made aware of this. And he works hard. He says he's a very ambitious man and he has certain goals to achieve. He's put everything out. The reason I know this is because I've spoken to the wife and to the husband. And the wife said, yes, all this was told to me before marriage. They had a child also. The child is now 6 years old and the child is autistic. When the wife got pregnant, she came back to India, did not go back. The child is now 6 years old and she's single-handedly trying to bring up an autistic child. She's not working. But she has now dug in her heels saying, I can't handle the girl alone. You need to come here. You need to give up your job, come here and take whatever job you get. Those of you who are in the field, you understand that the United States has much better care for special children like this. You can actually have an autistic child and hope to give the child a career, and a close to regular life. In India, we have not developed so much. Fact is, we have not. He has started coming home now just once a year, probably spends a month. In that 1 month, there's only fighting, screaming, shouting, breaking of plates, breaking of mirrors, breaking of glasses. That's all that happens. We have something in psychology, a term called as a personality disorder. All those fancy words I used before, paranoid, histrionic, and stuff like that. It means a paranoid personality disorder is someone who's kind of had a fractured psyche, dislikes themselves a lot, and takes off that personal dislike by targeting the other person, and is emotionally very volatile. So there will be mood swings, there'll be intense bursts of outrage, a lot of behavioral turbulence. we have spoken to psychiatrists, we've spoken to different legal people here, and we've realized that this is something that can't be proved in the court of law. Even a psychiatrist certificate will not help. I can vouch for the wife's instability because I've spoken to her. In any marriage, it is never one person's fault. Okay, both people are involved. But here, there is a clear case of a mental instability. It was after he came in for therapy, and I started explaining to the gentleman that, there's usually a genetic cause. Let's look into it. And when he dug into it, he took out some family history. Then he realized that the wife's mother's side, there are a lot of cases with mental illness. Nobody talked about it. Nobody questioned it. Good girl, pretty girl, good family. And now the legal system is such where the man is in trouble because it seems like he's abandoning his wife, and he's saying, no, I'm willing to take on the responsibility of the child also. Come there, get help. Wife refuses to come in for therapy. She came just for a couple of sessions just to prove to me that the husband is wrong. Where is this marriage going to go? The man in this case, I think, is being victimized because the legal system in this case is moved entirely towards supporting the wife, because it seems like wife is wife is alone, unemployed, and she's got an autistic child, and husband has abandoned her. And husband has given it in writing, put it notarized, got legal help to say that I'm willing to take them back. But they need to come there. She refuses to come there, and she has a basic inability to maintain friendships. She's not on good terms with her own mom, and she doesn't like her family. She doesn't like her friends. She has nobody to talk to. So her entire day goes in sending huge long texts to her husband, which we have printed out, took all of that, but not being accepted in a court of law. You just read an SMS or a WhatsApp message from her, and you can see the instability.
Yes, Cecilia, someone raised a hand. Can we give space for them? Yeah.
Yeah, is there a question? I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Somebody's raised their hand.
Yes.
Yeah, if anybody's having any questions, please ask now. Somebody raised hand, no?
But I think what you could also do is put your question in the chat box, and
yeah,
and as I finish,
you can unmute and you can speak.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll move ahead.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the second case. This is of an NRI woman who's married to a resident Indian man, oh, I'm sorry, there's a mistake here. She's not now in the US. Right now, they are in India. Both of them are in India. So this is a girl from a traditional Indian family, brought up, finished her entire schooling, most of her college in the United States. Now they're living in Dubai. Before marriage, she was living in Dubai, and you know how it is. Parents were like, "Listen, you may have traveled and studied abroad, but you need to get married to a good Indian boy," and she agreed. She was told it will be a joint family. She also put certain conditions, like she's a professional, she's a doctor, she's doing very well for herself, and she said, "Listen, my life is about service, and I want to be putting my work before everything else. So I'm willing to adjust with you if you can tell me that my life there will be no interference with my work at least." They said, yes, 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 of course, of course, of course. Now, this is a girl who's lived and educated abroad, who has a certain life view and vision, which is a little different from what most of us understand here with Indian men. She's independent, she's free thinking. But now what has happened, if I actually tell you, you may feel that there is actually nothing wrong. The husband is nice. Nobody is beating her, torturing her, taunting her, troubling her. They're telling her go to work and come back. But there is this very clear understanding that your family will come first, your mother-in-law and father-in-law, husband will come first, your work will come second. She's an independent woman who realizes that she doesn't really need the marriage. She's quite happy by herself. But she's quite heartbroken because this is a good guy. She was looking forward to a life ahead with this guy. But she knows that if she lives with him, she will have to put all her dreams on the back burner. So, and everyone in the family who's spoken to her has said, so what? Your job is not going to take care of you. Your husband is going to take care of you. So you should be there and you should have children. Then probably you'll lose interest in your job. The entire narrative has changed because initially they were just waiting to get her married, which because she's always been this independent, free thinking person. They thought if they put too many conditions at the start, she won't agree. So they focused on getting her married. Now she's married and they think now she has no escape. This is what they think. She came into therapy because she wanted to understand if what she was saying was right or wrong. I leave you all to decide, is she right? Is she wrong? She wants her life, which she had also made clear that my life is about service. She decided to become a doctor because she wanted to go out there and be of service to people. And it's not like she's one of those doctors working in those fancy private hospitals earning truckloads of money. No, she's working in a government hospital, does not run her own private practice, but runs a practice in a slum. So there's a lot of lack of clarity in this situation, because the whole world is telling her that you're wrong, and her heart is telling her that she's right. The last one is about a green card holder. I've written NRI woman, but it's basically a green card holder married to a resident Indian man from India, and now they are both living in the US. This woman is 34 years old. Let's consider her woman C. She already had a lot of. She went to the US when she was 15. She had a lot of trauma at the hands of her mother, who is already suffering from some psychological disorder. She was sponsored by her uncles and aunts, but there she was treated like an unpaid maid. So she's eventually very emotionally scarred already. Now, in spite of being from the US, her relatives and her family forced her to find a good Indian boy and then either come to India and live or come to the US. So she found a boy. Good or not, she figured out later. They got married and stayed here for some time, and then they went to the US. And once they went there, began the abuse. She still lives with him because she's now a shadow. She has no confidence, absolutely no self confidence. Somehow he managed to get her addicted to marijuana. So they spend about $1,000 every month just on marijuana. Not working, husband keeps her in doubt of herself. She has no courage to find a job. He doesn't want to leave her. He wants to be with her because obviously she's the one with the green card. He's doing some online jobs through India, so they have a lot of money happening between them. Somehow she managed to connect with me through a friend of hers, and I've been providing her online emotional support since about 3 months now. Listen to the symptoms, okay? A lot of her family and friends are telling her that, see, this boy is so hardworking. He doesn't want you to work. He doesn't want you to cook. He wants you to just sit and relax. They don't know how much of physical, emotional, sexual abuse she's going through. Her body does not digest water. She can't have more than 2 sips of water a day, because when she has water, she throws up. For the past 5 years, every morning when she wakes up, she's throwing up. She doesn't bother to dress well because she thinks she's worth nothing. There's a lot of self-harm. She cuts herself on your arm. She cuts herself on the leg. She just sometimes cuts off her hair. The first time I spoke to her, it was quite shocking, because one of the things I realized while talking to her is this is a girl with a very, very high IQ, very high intelligence. She is a trained Kathak dancer, but I really can't. I really was shocked at what has happened to her. But after some months of therapy, she's found the strength. Now she's yelling back at her husband, and she stopped him from beating her up. In fact, they had a very nice fight where she said that the next time you trouble me or you hit me, I will take your toothbrush and put it in the toilet and dry it, and you will not know. This is very funny that she came up with, out of all the punishments, she came up with something like that. So somehow she's managed to get a grip on herself, and she's managed to convince her husband that, listen, there's something wrong with you. Do you also need therapy? And he has agreed. So now as a team, we are working with the husband and the wife individually, and also sometimes putting them together and doing a joint therapy session. When you look at these cases, you see that this is just a very clever and sick mind of the husband, which has taken advantage of the vulnerability of this woman, and under the garb of Indian marriage and culture, is using and misusing this relationship with her. And it makes you wonder. It reminds you that this institution is probably not achieving the goals that it was meant to achieve. Marriage was established for a very nice reason. Purpose was good. Somewhere along the way, things got ruined. And there's so many things that I've said which have to do with culture, which is primarily the reason why we are in this space. If you look at NRI marriages, just think about it very, very practically. This is a very non-normal marriage. Firstly, a lot of people don't understand arranged marriages. Those of us who've lived in India, find arranged marriages quite normal. In fact, we are able to find romance and love and happiness even in arranged marriages. And there's nothing wrong with it. Now take this and kind of evaluate a situation where a girl who is probably educated in the modern educational system, has access to a lot of what's happening in the Western world, what should I say, educated and globalized, is now put into a system where she has to follow traditions which were established probably a few hundred years ago for a different purpose. What is really causing the mental breakdown? Is it the fact that marriages are lived away from family and friends? Is it that marriages can't survive outside India? Some things clearly are unnatural uh, in an NRI marriage. There is no social support, unfamiliar places, no friends, extreme dependency on just one person, the caged home environment. Also, public transport is not available in most of the Western countries. You don't like get into a bus, get into an auto, and go away. Taxis are expensive, buses are uncommon. Unless you know to drive and have a license over there, you can't be driving. So you're stuck in one place. You're entirely dependent on your partner to drive you around to even buy basic grocery stuff. Correct. So all that you are expecting, the husband will continue to have his social life. Wife is not expected to have any independent needs. And the one word which is told to every woman in marriage: adjust, adjust, adjust. And a lot of people are okay with it. I mean, if you think it's fine, it's fine. But do you realize the impact it's having on the mental health? Of course, now we have WhatsApp and video calling, and you can stay in touch with friends and family. But unless both partners are psychologically flexible, adaptable, respectful, open-minded, living in the same home as someone you have no emotional connect with is an extremely traumatic experience. You're not just roommates. You walked into this situation with a certain dream, and that dream is not living itself out. It's almost like a hostage situation. Simple question. I'm not making it a poll. I'm just asking you if you can think about this. Can you sit quietly for 5 minutes every day without looking at the phone, without listening to music, without talking to anybody, sitting alone in a room doing nothing, absolutely nothing? Now, some of us like to call ourselves lazy because we just lie down and we are doing nothing. A lot of the students tend to say that. But otherwise, moving away from the students, how many of you think you can just sit and do absolutely nothing and be comfortable with it? Not just be comfortable, be happy with yourself and look at yourself and say, like, I'm good. I'm feeling sorted. When we have therapy sessions, this is one of the questions I ask, and a lot of them say, no, I can't sit quietly for more than 2 minutes, or all sorts of thoughts come into my head and I start getting anxious or I start getting panicky. So I get up and start doing something. Yes, Kalpana, you will admire yourself. That's great. That's wonderful if you can do that. But for most people, this ability to sit quietly is not possible. And imagine you take an active woman from this country and put her in another country where she has no friends, has nothing to do, and she has to just sit at home and do possibly the cooking, cleaning, and where allowed to do some other work. It's not very easy. If a lot of us cannot do it in the comfort of our home, how much more difficult is it to do it when you're far away? Also, the problem is no one wants to accept that they have emotional issues. When you meet a friend, when you go to the doctor, you say, oh, I went to the doctor, I had a cold, or I went to the cardiologist, or I went to the gynecologist, but you'll not say I went to the therapist. Mental health by itself has a lot of stigma. To say that my marriage is not working is another stigma. To say I got married and I went abroad is not working is another stigma. Put all these stigmas together and imagine the state of the person. And I won't say girl, state of the person, whether it is male or female. Imagine what they are going through. We keep looking for solutions outside, change the behavior, get a different job, move to another location, change specific things in the marriage. But the essential reason is the relationship is not targeted. In fact, even when we do marital counseling, a lot of therapists have this habit. They'll take the client, they'll take the husband separately and try to make everything right with the husband, take the wife separately, try to make everything right for the wife. But what is the problem is the relationship, the dynamics, the interplay between the two people. That is what needs to be worked out. We may be great people independently, but with another person, we may not be that great. Recommendations, I'll quickly wind up the recommendations because there are so many factors that affect the level of mental health of a person at any given time. These are some of the things you could do. You can't set a marriage right. Like they say, you can't prevent once you get cavities, if you start brushing your teeth, it doesn't help. You keep brushing your teeth so that you don't get cavities. So prevention is the biggest part. Those of you in the audience who have young women as your friends, as your daughters, as your colleagues, young women yourselves who are looking to get married and go abroad, look at ways by which you can build yourselves. Look at starting programs. Research scholars, teachers over here, look at starting programs where there is support given to the youth in your class to help them understand their mental status. Support elderly population, support children. Why support the elderly population? The reason the seniors in the family try to get you married off to any situation is because they themselves are insecure. Give them the confidence to live by their beliefs rather than to just follow societal norms. Provide mental health proportional activities in schools, at work. Some housing policies, those of you who know, in some of the cities, it's very, very difficult for single women to get a house on rent. They just assume that you are characterless and that you will only party and that you will destroy the moral fiber of everybody in that building or in that colony. Begin and initiate violence prevention programs amongst the young men also, so that they understand how to conduct themselves and handle women in their lives. Um, Start something called as premarital counseling. I don't know why it is not there. In some communities, premarital counseling is essential. Like I know in the Christian church that you have to go for premarital counseling before you get married. Otherwise, you're not given permission to get married. So instead of just looking at the Jadagam, the Kundli, the history, biology, etc., one of our primary neglects, we're not trying to understand the mental state. It's a very cultural practice specific to Asian marriages countries. So why not try and look at assessing the person psychologically also? I know it sounds very impossible, but try to understand, is the person okay? So many ways, so many red flags. If the person tends to call you names, is very critical, tends to make you doubt yourself, invades your privacy, is attention seeking, tends to is trying to be too too perfect in their actions. Trust your instinct. And especially to the young women over here, I would very, very strongly say trust your instincts. At any point, if you feel that something's wrong, trust your instinct and step back. There is something called as pre-wedding jitters, and you get nervous before your wedding. That is fine. That is a good feeling. Light nervous feeling also. Trust your instinct. And imagine, see, instinct is not this body has evolved over hundreds, millions of years. So the ability of the body to perceive threat is very, very strong. But for that, you have to be able to pay attention to your body. Most of us don't pay attention to our bodies. Earlier the dangers in our life was probably the wild tiger or something like that. But now the danger is a traffic jam, or the danger is a colleague, or a danger is some fight with your best friend. Threat has changed, but your body's ability to perceive threat hasn't changed. So that is why now quite a few schools of therapy, what we call somatic schools of therapy, we are talking about being aware of bodily sensations. Tightness in the chest, rapid breathing, heartbeats are rapid, cold feet, heaviness in the head, pain in the neck, shoulders, all indicates emotional state. Wherever you're sitting right now, just sit straight, put your feet on the ground, notice your body after we finish the session, and just see if there's anything happening, any sensation. Notice that sensation and think about what that sensation means to you. This is all documented and researched. Earlier, the Indian tradition has a very strong history of understanding the mind-body connection. The Western tradition is just beginning to understand it now. Neuroscience is understanding and recognize the value of deep breathing in regulating your nervous system. It is identified that your body sniffs out danger faster than your brain does. So please go ahead and start recognizing your instinct when you make those decisions, and pass this information on the others. Recognize your emotional vulnerabilities. Recognize that there are times that there are things about us, we are not perfect, we have weaknesses. So recognize how you deal with weaknesses. What do you do in your life when you have a challenging or a difficult moment in your life? Teach your children to how to be emotionally and mentally self-sufficient. Self-love and self-respect is not wrong. It does not mean you're selfish. The more you teach people to respect themselves and love themselves, the better they will be able to look after themselves, and they will not allow others to disrespect them. The basic foundation is for self-love. I know we are self-sacrifice, give up, adjust, manage. All of that was great, and it is correct up until a certain time. The age that we are stepping into now, there's a lot more uncertainty, and there's a lot more attacking forces out there. So a lot of self-love is required. in the middle of all this chaos, if your goal is to have an NRI partner, great, but and prepare yourself, not just physically and financially, but psychologically also. You are what you tell yourself you are. So make sure you're saying that you're healthy, positive, encouraging things, keep saying such things to yourself. Don't just prepare your bank account and your qualification. Look after your mental health. Thank you so much for your time. With this, I shall stop. It's very nice of you. I can see that quite a few of the audience have stayed. Not everyone has left. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah, no, not like. Thank you, Cecilia. Uh, Very informative. We all enjoyed your session.
Thank you.
And now the forum is open for questions. If anybody has any questions, please unmute and share, ask her questions now. She knows Tamil well. She's
Well,
from Tamil Nadu, from Almir Bharata University. So all are free to talk.
yes, Kalpana ma'am. Yes.
Yeah, I'm Kalpana from Department of Women's Studies.
Hello, ma'am.
Being a counselor in India, premarital counseling is that in existence in our country? The people are coming for premarital counseling.
Yes, like I said, in some communities they have woken up to the fact. Some of them they do it through their religious communities. Some families have gotten involved and have started working towards premarital counseling. A lot of the young couples are coming on their own. So even if they are in love and they have known each other for some time, quite a few of them have met me saying that we are planning to get married, and before we take that step, we want to talk to each other. In fact, I have quite a few couples. I have about 7 couples who are living in with each other, cohabitation, and they are now considering getting married. But before doing that, they decided to talk to me. So
Actually, it's coming from north or south.
um, now at least one. It's across. See, these are people who have been living in Bombay for a while. I understand where your question is coming from. Uh, so I know 2 of the girls are actually, one is a Chennai girl, one is from Udupi area. So I know Udupi is Karnataka, no? So there are but these girls have lived and worked and studied here. So
Okay.
Bombay. So besides their own natural cultural upbringing, they've also had a lot of exposure to the challenges of marriages. But one thing I can tell for sure, all the people who are coming for premarital counseling have seen challenges in the marriage of their parents.
Parents.
Yeah, their parents' marriages have been so challenging that they have said, we don't want to make the same
Okay.
mistake. And also, the girls are all educated, financially very safe. So they don't feel that I need a husband to look after me financially. The choice is that a husband would make my parents happy and would make life simpler. That's it.
Thank you so much.
No welcome, ma'am. Anybody else?
Yeah. Anybody else? I think somebody raised their hand between the session. If you
Yeah.
have any questions, you can ask now.
Dr. Radhika raised her hand, but she said that question I have
Yeah,
covered.
Radhika, you can.
No, but she said she's covered the content. Thank you, Dr. Radhika. My senior, super senior. Yes, Sharmila ma'am. Yes, you want to say something?
Anybody else have any questions?
I guess I would like,
Fine.
yeah.
Yeah, I think somebody unmuted. You can ask in Tamil also. She knows Tamil. She's from Tamil Nadu, from Coimbatore.
Anga, you're putting me in trouble. Okay.
Cecilia, do you think any difference between South Indian women or North Indian women regarding the perception of what you asked about the marriage?
I would say it is not a difference between North Indian and South Indian. I would say it's a difference between um, being brought up in an urban setup with more exposure or being brought up in a non-urban setup. There are specific communities where I see certain patterns for sure, but I'm not going to name them because it will cause a lot of
Yeah.
hurt.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
there are some communities, even today in our country, which are very educated, which are very well to do, and which are very, very rigid in their cultural beliefs. Like the doctor I told you about. I mean, she's a brilliant woman, and it's heartbreaking to see what she's going through. Brilliant, young, beautiful. And I know that had she not gone through the arranged marriage route, and we have this option of talking to your partner before choosing to get married. So she took 1 year to make the decision to say yes for marriage, and even after that there is a complication, simply because information given before marriage does not match action after marriage. So
Yes.
not north, south, east, west, but it's non-globalized. That makes a difference.
Yeah. Dr. Kalpana. Yeah, I think you asked some questions in between, right? Dr. M. Kalpana.
M. Kalp.
She has Dr.
Dr. M.
Kalpana.
Kalpana.
Yeah, she's posted in the chat box. Thank you, Kalpana ma'am. Thank you,
Yes.
Julie. Thank you, Suganya ma'am. Thank
Yeah.
you, all of you who have said nice things.
Yes.
You can say not nice things.
Yes, you can
also.
unmute and speak. Yes, you can unmute, speak, ma'am.
Oh, Kanchan ma'am, thank you very much. Somebody said my voice is very sweet. Thank you.
Yes. So shall we have formal vote of thanks to Dr. Cecilia? Yes, Sharmila?
Yes. Yes.
Ma'am, Mureshri ma'am?
Yeah.
Ma'am, please ma'am. Unmute and speak, ma'am. Dr. Mureshri ma'am?
Yeah, I'm here only. Ma'am, it was so enlightened session. It was very intellectual thought created by us, right? So most of the people not aware of NRI issues and challenges, particularly women and children. This is more questionable now. So what is your opinion regarding this? Because of course, two more professors raised the right point from south or north, and some of the case studies also shared. My question is, from your side, you got a lot of experience, a number of case studies you have gone through, but the people still are not having awareness and a consciousness in this regard. There are some supporting laws and favoring laws for NRI, women, children, even men also having it. And today is the right day, Human Rights Day, we are talking about again issues and challenges. What is your opinion in this regard? How to reduce? We can't totally eradicate these issues because the culture, again, there are some racism, sexism, it plays a vital role in our society. So, what is your opinion whether we can eradicate or reduce this kind of issues in the initial level? Because there are unreported cases also, still it is there. So, what is your opinion in this regard? So, this is the joint effort we can take it to the society to avoid such kind of issues. This is what I feel. So, generally, we won't say that always we are talking about problems, but none of the people are not taking hand the challenges like so women are facing, particularly NRI and other kind of violence cases. So, what is your opinion in this regard, ma'am?
I have an opinion which is a very strong opinion, and it is an opinion which I know most people will not agree with Murugeshwari ma'am. But thank you for asking me what my opinion is. Like I shared some recommendations on what can be done to improve mental health in all parties concerned. But if you look at what is the core issue, there was a statement I made in passing. Divorce is happening because marriage is happening. NRI marriages are a problem because marriages are a necessity. As a society, can we reconsider? I know it's a very scary thing, and a lot of people are not going to like what I'm saying. Can we reconsider this insane pressure that we put on everybody, go get married? There was a point where marriage was essential. Please understand, if you look at the evolution of human beings, marriage had a reason. Marriage was because a human child growing up needs a stable mother, stable father. All right. There are 7.5 billion people on this planet. Even if nobody reproduces for some time, we will continue very strongly for a sufficient amount of time. The purpose of marriage somewhere has gotten lost. Partnership, companionship, we have forgotten all of that. So every time there is a talk of marriage, when you meet a young girl, no, Murugeshwari ma'am, when you meet one of your students after a few years, please don't ask her when are you getting married. Or if she's married, please don't ask her when are you having a child. Can we do that? Can we just say, how are you? Are you happy? Like the one question that I ask my students, I've been teaching for about 16 years now. One thing I teach, whenever I meet them, my question to them is, are you happy? My question is not, what are you doing? Are you married? It's not. And I know it's a huge thing. Understand why marriage exists, understand why marriage has these restrictions, and understand who put these restrictions. Then whether it is NRI marriage or non-NRI marriage, so the problem gets largely tackled. I don't know if you like my answer, but that's what I feel.
Right, ma'am. Of course, I should accept that because there is no way. So we have to take a little bit step before, like what you said, premarital counseling and all. This is very much needed nowadays, particularly young girls affecting more than above 40 and 50 and all. They had some kind of issues, but they are not revealing it. But what I feel nowadays, the people one who got married from 20 to 30 or 35, they are facing a little bit of problems and they don't know how to tackle the issues. So mentally they are not ready. So sometimes they are accepting because of family status, ego, the status or the family name and all. So this leads to different kinds of problems. So this is the right time. I should thank Dr. Mangesh Tersi also. Oh, such a nice topic she has chosen, and she got the fund from National Commission for Women. And even National Commission for Women also reported and produced a lot of reports with regard to NRI marriages, issues and challenges. What are the common laws, favoring laws for women also. So in this regard, at the outset, I must thank the resource person as well as Bharadar University Women's Studies Department, particularly Dr. Mangesh Tersi. So thank you so much for this opportunity, Dr. Mangesh Tersi, ma'am.
There is one statement made by Shalini and Shalini.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
And yeah, Shalini.
She said there are many new things to know about the psychology of the human beings regarding NRI marriages. Shalini ma'am, I want to tell you there's a lot to know about the psychology of human beings. Full stop. Marriages, NRI marriages come secondary. If you understand what can make a person and what can break a person, automatically a lot of these institutions which are actually breaking down people will fall away. Yes, thank you all.
Yeah, I think this boy is from Manipal.
Oh,
He's a
wonderful.
boy. Yeah, doing women's studies course. Yeah. Now, Sharmila Banu, please.
Yeah, ma'am.
Yeah, out of thanks. Yeah.